was a savvy entrepreneur who'd made millions in real estate.
He was sort of a wheeler-dealer.
My dad's business, it was some amazing stuff. He really had a gift for that.
They were sort of living the life.
Anything and everything he could want.
But sometimes everything isn't enough.
There was blood all over the floor.
There was glass everywhere.
It's up to investigators to determine, did the millionaire pull the trigger? Or was he the victim of greed and revenge?
She's been taken for a fool.
He was the sole heir as the sole child.
Is there some type of conspiracy here?
Friday, September 30th, 2011. It's a quiet morning in the wealthy seaside town of Jupiter, Florida.
You have some very elite and exclusive communities that are big dollar communities in Jupiter. A full range of mega mansions.
But while most of Jupiter's well-heeled residents are still getting ready for work, a security guard responds to an alarm at the home of real estate developer Lanny Horowitz, his wife Donna, and their son Radley.
Admirals Cove is a private community. It's got an exclusive golf club in it, and they have from townhomes all the way up to the super mansions in there.
It's on the water. It's a strictly gated community. It's monitored. The alarm system from the house would ring through to the gate.
And in this residence, there's multiple glass break alarms, which activate when there's vibration, the sound amplitude. In this case, 3 glass break alarms are what tripped the alarm.
The security guard comes to the home. Radley's the one who's, at the door with him, and he describes Radley as being a person who's, groggy, a person when you just encounter them when they're waking up.
He must have been just driving by on a patrol, because, he was there incredibly fast. And I let him in the front door, and he went into the bathroom where my dad was.
The shower was running. There was blood all over the floor and the walls.
The glass was on the ground and scattered throughout the room.
On the bathroom floor, covered in blood, is a man the guard recognizes as 66-year-old Lanny Horowitz.
You can see one bullet wound on his side.
He describes, unfortunately, the gargling that we often see when people are very close to death, when they're gasping for air.
As Lanny draws his last breath, the guard rushes to call for help.
Yes, this is Admiral Security calling in because we have a dead person.
Lanny Horowitz's road to success began in Buffalo, New York.
My father got involved with his father at a young age with real estate. He apparently took to real estate like a fish to water.
Lanny was sort of a wheeler-dealer, real estate guy, always kind of looking for the next big real estate deal.
But while real estate was Lanny's passion, his first love was his wife, Donna.
My father was 15 and my mom was 14 at the time. As my father told me, he saw my mom coming down the stairs for the first time at his friend's house. And he knew right then that was the girl he wanted to marry.
She was a very beautiful woman. She was very stunning.
She was very caring and compassionate, but a strong woman.
They hit it off, and the rest is history.
The couple married in 1967, while Lanny was working his way through law school.
He never practiced law, but it was a huge help, because when you're a developer, the joke is you're basically a professional defendant.
As Lanny started his professional career, he and Donna started a family.
I was born in 1974. I remember a lot of snow and a big yard.
Radley was the only child of Donna and Lanny Horowitz.
A few years after Radley's birth, the family left Buffalo behind.
I was 3 years old when a blizzard of 77 hit, and both my parents and a lot of other people at the time decided it was time to go someplace south, a little sunnier, and as my father used to say, where the weather won't kill you. And then we wound up moving to Jupiter, Florida.
They live right on the water. There's full water access to the yacht club, and it's got an exclusive golf club. It's a beautiful community.
In the Sunshine State, Lanny set to work building his real estate empire.
He sort of had his hands in a lot of different pots. He was a businessman. You had cars and real estate, and Lanny had money. They were sort of living the life.
But now, Lanny Horowitz's life has come to a sudden, horrific end.
The call came out initially of a possible shooting incident which had occurred in Admiral's Cove.
It was like something out of a movie, just, police and fire trucks and everything. And my mom and I are standing out in the driveway.
While Radley and Donna wait, investigators take stock of the bloody scene inside the mansion's master bath.
The scene is going to tell you what happened in this residence. So we take our time to observe and see what you have and digest what you have and see, is this what it's telling us, or is there something a little bit more to it?
There were no shell casings, and I did see a revolver. It had been moved by one of the security guys. So when he came in to do life-saving techniques, he moved the gun away.
The revolver was initially either near or in Mr. Horowitz's hand.
So the first officers that arrived from the Jupiter Police Department thought that they were responding to a suicide call.
But does the evidence tell a different story?
There's a shower to the right, and there's an obvious bullet impact through the glass door.
Lanny was shot inside that shower. There was blood pattern, cast-off spatter inside the shower. The shower glass had a white towel hanging over it.
You can see a hole through the towel that correlates to the center of where the bullet went through the glass door.
I knew right away it wasn't a suicide. There's no way he would have been able to shoot himself while he's in the shower from outside the shower.
We definitely have a crime scene.
Coming up, was a killer lurking inside Lanny's home?
He told us that it was a tumultuous relationship.
Police in Jupiter, Florida have just found millionaire real estate developer Lanny Horowitz shot dead in his waterfront villa.
Just the fact that a crime occurred there is shocking. A burglary there would be shocking.
The community where this case took place, Admiral's Cove, is a very, very affluent community.
There are numerous amount of gated communities, multi-million-dollar homes.
You're looking at Jaguars, Porsches.
But now, police are looking at a murder.
It was readily apparent that this couldn't have been a suicide.
The bullet came from outside the shower. We don't have a suicide here anymore. We have potentially a homicide here.
Investigators also realized that Lanny had suffered multiple gunshot wounds.
There was so much blood, we couldn't see all of the holes in him until the medical examiner came and started flipping him over and doing what he does. That's when we noticed that there were many bullet holes in his body.
When the blood and the glass are removed and they see where there are 10 shots.
And we knew that the gun that was closest to him in the hallway couldn't have been the only gun unless there had been a reload, because it had a 5-shot capacity.
That's when we started looking for the other firearm.
As you're looking at those 2 bathroom doors, if you take a jog to the left, you then enter into the actual master bedroom, which was, the second gun was actually back down in the bedroom on the dresser.
The second revolver also holds 5 rounds.
It's 2 5-shot revolvers. All 10 shots have been fired.
The guns at the scene, along with other evidence, tell investigators Lanny's killer isn't an intruder.
There's absolutely no way someone else got into that residence. Every single window and door was sealed up.
We also knew that the alarm to the house did not go off until the first shot happened.
They call them glass break alarm, but really the concussion of the trigger being pulled tripped the alarm. And I could tell you exactly to the second when 3 of those rounds were shot.
You'd had to believe that person got into the home without tripping the alarm, committed the murder with guns that belonged specifically to Lanny and Donna, and then exited the home again without tripping the alarm. It just doesn't make sense.
All the evidence points investigators in one direction. Lanny's death was an inside job.
Which means our suspect pool is immediately limited to Donna or Radley.
When investigators approach Donna, she appears too distraught to give them a statement.
Donna's sitting in the front seat of one of their vehicles. She's got her knees up. She's kind of almost like hugging herself. And we introduce ourselves. She never speaks with us, never answers or acknowledges us.
She sort of made motions like, I can't hear you.
And they basically had no further real interaction with Donna.
Investigators are able to speak with Radley, however.
I mean, I was afraid to, ask the cops anything, and I'm like, is my dad okay, And one of the cops just kind of, shook his head but didn't say anything, asked me a bunch of questions and stuff.
I did a gunshot residue test on him, which detects any gunshot residue if he was to have fired the gun.
Then investigators ask Radley to come down to the station for a formal statement.
I appreciate that. You coming in here at all to give a statement. He came and he brought his lawyer, which is his right, and we had no problem with that. Especially the fact that even though he's bringing his lawyer, he was still 100% open with us and spoke with us.
Although, for all his openness, what Radley tells investigators raises plenty of red flags.
They asked if my dad was abusive, I remember that.
Never physical with me. Psychologically, but just petty and nasty,
I said, only verbally, only mentally. My dad could be a real needling prick. He had a real way about him.
He described his father as being sometimes abrasive, very short. He told us that it was a tumultuous relationship.
My dad was never warm, effusive, like he used to say, I'm not a warm, effusive person.
Radley also admits that he and his father had suffered a major falling out a few years earlier, after Radley opened a gun shop near Jupiter.
I wasn't making very much money at it, but it was my passion. It was the one thing that I really, really loved, and he had given me some incredibly bad advice with the gun business.
Radley had wanted to order some kind of a kit that could transform a semi-automatic gun to an automatic gun. And according to Radley, he asked his father, who was an attorney, if he believed that it was legal, and his dad told him just to order it.
I took his advice, and that did not go very well.
Radley ordered the part and ended up being arrested and convicted and got sentenced to federal prison for some short period of time. But as a result of that, he lost his ability to have the gun shop, and he lost his ability to own or be in possession of a firearm.
It was a shattering experience, to say the least.
But was it motive for murder?
He was very hurt by the firearm situation. He was still sour about that.
Radley, over and over said, hey, listen, I didn't do anything here. I didn't do anything here. I didn't have anything to do with this.
Coming up, investigators put Radley's family ties to the test.
Can't live with him, can't live without him.
Police in Jupiter, Florida, are investigating the murder of millionaire real estate developer Lanny Horowitz. and Lanny's son Radley has just revealed a possible motive.
What Radley told me was he blames going to prison on his dad. And then when he got in trouble, his dad was unsympathetic and basically laughed at him.
Now suspicious of Radley, investigators ask him to walk them through the events surrounding his father's death.
Let's go over again. You tell us in your words what happened that morning. There were lots of little details that he gave us of where he was in the residence, how he woke up.
He was laser focused on every act he did.
What he said was, I got up, couldn't really understand what was going on.
I heard shots, and I don't think I heard any. I pulled out earplug. Those orange ones are pretty good. And screaming. And I got out of bed, and again, I don't know how many. I can't say how many shots I heard. But, and again, if that woke me up or what.
He said, I had orange noise-canceling plugs that you commonly use at the shooting range. He said, I had those in my ear.
Even with the plugs in, it certainly woke me up.
He said, pulling the earplugs out, and that's when I heard the alarm going off. I rushed into my mom's room.
Radley tells investigators that he found Donna outside the bathroom door, apparently distraught with grief.
I just saw, my mom screaming. I went to the bedroom door, and I could see my dad.
Radley said he sees his mom right outside that master suite area screaming and saying he was so mean. He's been saying he would do this. So he assumed this is the suicide. And he said that he could see his father's body laying on the bathroom floor. He said that he then asked his mother, can I get you some water? And he went to the kitchen and got her a bottle of water and gave it to her.
After taking Radley's statement, investigators returned to Admiral's Cove.
We went back in the house to see whether or not we could corroborate some of the things that he was telling us.
Somebody tells us what happens on scene. The point is not what they tell us, but does the evidence support what they're telling us?
There was one earplug he dropped in the hallway as he's going out, and the one was right next to his bed on the bedstand.
When we went back into the bathroom, there was a water bottle on the sink.
Everything that Radley told us, you could corroborate with a piece of evidence. So immediately that tells us, okay, he's being honest.
Radley was very cooperative, answering their questions.
Donna proves far less forthcoming, though.
She didn't give an interview.
Even at the scene, she wouldn't participate and have a general conversation out in the driveway.
She never spoke with any law enforcement directly.
Does that mean Donna has something to hide? Detectives suspect her first words to Radley might contain a clue.
She was, yelling like Radley. It was either he's so horrible or he was so awful. I knew he would do this.
He took that to mean that he committed suicide. In retrospect, who knows what she meant by those words.
Hoping for answers, investigators turned to the rest of Lanny's family.
In speaking with Lanny's sisters, we were able to get all those pieces of the puzzle of their life together.
Investigators learned that behind the millionaire couple's successful facade, their marriage had been struggling for years.
Once I graduated from school, stuff started to change with them, and my mom started to change. He was just always working, and she became resentful of that. And the more and more that my father got involved with it, the more that my mother felt neglected. Was the way that he had described it to me, and my mom told me that they were getting divorced.
Donna and Lanny had been married and then divorced. Then they got remarried and divorced again.
They had first divorced in around 2000, but they got back together and remarried, and it was down at a Justice of the Peace ceremony down in Palm Beach Gardens, just down the road from Jupiter, and I went along for that and got to see my parents married for the second time there. And then they wound up apart again.
However, it wasn't long before the couple reconciled a second time.
They did end up getting back together, and it was a lot of what you hear, just, can't live with them, can't live without them sort of thing.
At the time that this happened, Lanny had invited her into the house so that they could, according to him, be a family unit again.
The way my father announced it to me was, this weekend you'll help your mother move back into the house. And I was like, that's fantastic.
Although, according to Radley, his father had an ulterior motive: Donna's family money.
Donna's mother was very well off. Donna's father had played professional baseball and so had a good deal of money from that.
A couple of business deals hadn't come to fruition, so Lanny was sort of needing some money. The house was expensive to maintain.
She didn't see it as a loan to Lanny. She saw the money more as this is the way that they could live together in the family home.
I didn't know at that point how many mortgages were on the house in Admiral's Cove, but he convinced my mom to get $200,000 from my grandmother, and everything was pretty obvious what was going on.
This was nothing more than a ruse to get the money out of her, and she's been taken for a fool.
But did that mean Donna killed the love of her life?
It was clear that you had a woman who was angry and a woman who was fed up and finally broke.
Coming up, investigators uncover a game-changing clue.
We knew immediately that this was potentially an important piece of evidence.
Detectives investigating the murder of Florida millionaire Lanny Horowitz have narrowed their possible suspects down to two choices: the dead man's wife or his son.
Basically, we knew at that point we were dealing with, was it Radley Horowitz or Donna Horowitz?
They were the only two people in the house when Lanny was shot.
Both Radley and Donna had compelling motives to pull the trigger. But when the results of Radley's gunshot residue test come in, it suggests he's not the shooter.
Radley had no gunpowder residue on his hands.
Could it have been washed off? Potentially. But I find it very doubtful that someone's going to then, immediately after those alarms are going off and security's already on the way, they're going to go and clean up their hands.
Just to be sure, investigators return to the house and perform a luminol test.
Luminol is a chemical we use to detect small traces of blood, maybe after a cleanup. I actually did it on all the sinks in every bathroom, the kitchen, and I think there was one in the utility room that I did also.
Lanny's sink was indicating of the luminol.
Could that explain Radley's negative test for gunshot residue? Investigators expand their search, looking for additional evidence.
They didn't know what happened. Is he covering for his mother? Did they do it together? Is there some type of conspiracy here between the two?
They further went through the home and they found her journal.
This was a personal journal of Donna's, so we knew immediately that this was potentially an important piece of evidence.
The early entries in Donna's journal reveal a woman happy to rekindle her relationship with Lanny.
It's very hopeful. She talks about how he's reached out and he wants to try again.
However, after Donna returned to Admiral's Cove, the contents of her journal started to change.
It showed her progressively getting more angry and just more upset about certain situations that were occurring.
They basically become very short entries about her daily interactions with Lanny and his lies to her.
There was mention of another woman, and you can tell that Donna didn't like it.
The other woman's name was Francine Tice.
Francine was involved in the real estate industry and was working with Lanny on a few different projects. The two of them were very tight, very good friends and business associates.
She was very, very sharp, very smart, and very much a type A, personality, a go-getter, much like my dad.
It developed into a very close personal relationship.
There was some suggestion that she was a mistress. We didn't really have any evidence to suggest that it was sexual or romantic in nature.
Francine vehemently denied having any sort of sexual relationship with Lanny.
Whether it was true or not, it was true to Donna. Donna absolutely 100% believed that Lanny and Francine were intimate with each other, and she documented in detail in that journal things that would support her belief that this was more than just a friendship.
Her entries in the diary showed, well, he's been with Fran all day. He goes here with Fran. He does this with Fran. It was clear that Fran became a point of contention for Donna.
The journal also makes clear that in the countdown to Lanny's death, Donna's anger of the alleged love triangle came to a head.
Donna said at one point in the journal that as things began to unravel quickly, Lanny said to Donna, "If I knew that Francine felt about me the way I do now, no, I would never have asked you to move back in the house." So she's basically heartbroken. He tells her she's got to move out. And I believe what the straw was, she finds out he's going to North Carolina, this last-minute business trip with Francine, and he tells her in no uncertain terms, you be moved out of the house when I get back.
There was a suitcase in the bedroom right outside the bathroom that was packed for him to leave on his trip that morning.
He was certainly ready to go, and I think that ultimately she said enough. You're not going anywhere. And it was sort of the last act of a woman's scorn.
You could see her getting more upset, getting closer to the date that Lanny was killed.
More and more layers start to pull back. The evidence is inescapable that, she absolutely killed Lanny Horowitz.
There was no question in our mind that this absolutely was Donna Horowitz.
On October 6th, 2011, 6 days after Lanny's murder, investigators placed Donna under arrest.
We had Donna under observation already by this point. Call was made, and they took Donna into custody.
She wasn't interviewed at that time, and she chose not to.
She was charged with first-degree murder with a firearm.
Coming up, will a jury believe that a mild-mannered 65-year-old is capable of murder?
It's not something that society is used to believing, that this upper-class white woman is going to go and just blast her husband 10 times.
Police in the seaside town of Jupiter, Florida, have arrested Donna Horowitz for the murder of her ex-husband, Lanny Horowitz. She's accused of shooting the millionaire real estate developer 10 times on the morning of September 30th, 2011.
Donna Horowitz was charged with first-degree murder with a firearm, and in the state of Florida, that's a mandatory life sentence.
It was clear to us, based on the evidence at the scene, that what took this from a second-degree classic crime of passion to first-degree premeditated murder was the number of the shots.
Premeditation, there's no time limit. It can happen in an instant, as long as it takes the actor to formulate the idea, the thought, the intent to kill.
Her trial begins in January of 2013 at the Palm Beach County Courthouse.
We informed the jury that you're going to learn about this family that lived a nice lifestyle in a beautiful gated community.
Admiral's Cove is a very prestigious, affluent area.
But according to prosecutors, the family's prestige and affluence masked a quiet desperation.
The events that lead to the morning of September 30th are tragic, but as old as time. And basically, to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's going to be clear to you beyond every doubt at the end of this that this was nothing more than a woman who was heartbroken and had had enough.
It was clear that there was tension, and my mom, you could see her losing weight and stuff as everything seemed to sort of be setting in with her over what was happening and what my dad had done.
It was always our position that she killed Lanny because she had a broken heart. You can feel her broken heart in the journal entries. That this was a woman scorned. This was a woman whose world was slipping away.
Prosecutors believe the final break came on the evening of the 30th, when Lanny announced he was leaving town with Francine.
Our supposition is that he's packed all his things and he's going away with Francine, and then she gets told, "You got to be out of the house when I return."
She came to a point of realizing that his behavior wasn't changing and that he was using her.
It was clear that she had been scorned and he had made a fool of her. He probably made fun of her and ridiculed her. And then he gets in the shower and has not a care in the world. And she basically said, enough's enough.
And I think she just snapped. She went into the bathroom, took both the guns, and while he's in the shower, she just unloaded the firearm.
That's the dance of death. Lanny was not standing still as he's getting murdered. He's ducking, he's rolling, he's weaving, and we know this because of the blood spatter everywhere.
She just continues to shoot. I think she was sick of the frustration, sick of all the comments he was making and the lies.
This is somebody whose world is slipping away, and they are outraged, they are hurt, they are upset. And the manner that this was done, the number of shots, this cries a woman scorned. This cries, love gone bad.
However, prosecutors claim that Donna's rage at Lanny didn't prevent her from trying to cover her tracks.
She switched over to that rational thinking pretty quickly, in that she hears the alarm going off and knows that she has to act quickly.
When Radley responded to answer the front door for the security guard, Donna had the opportunity to move the gun or do whatever, manipulate whatever she wanted to manipulate.
She puts one gun in his hand and then wipes down the other gun but puts it in the holster so people won't even draw attention to the fact that that gun could have been used.
Luckily, they recognized pretty quickly that this wasn't a suicide.
But can prosecutors convince the jury that Donna is a killer?
It's not something that society is used to believing, that this upper class white woman is going to go and just blast her husband 10 times.
When Radley takes the stand for the prosecution, his stunning testimony just might be Donna's salvation.
He stood by his mom. He tried to justify actions.
I felt very bad for her. And I said a million times that if there was ever a case for battered spouse syndrome and temporary insanity, this would have been it.
Radley testified and remembered hearing Donna say he was just so horrible. He was just so horrible, sort of repeating that.
Radley never asked his mother if she killed his father. Radley never asked Donna, "Did you kill Lanny?" And the reason he didn't is because he didn't want to hear the answer. He didn't want to be the person who would have to testify and say, "My mother told me she did this."
He would never totally give his mom up. He said, "All I can tell you is it was only two of us there and I didn't do it."
Coming up, Donna repays Radley by committing the ultimate betrayal.
Here comes your mom, you're the person that's supposed to protect you, saying, "You did this."
The prosecution has rested in the murder trial of Donna Horowitz. The 66-year-old is charged with killing her ex-husband, millionaire real estate developer Lanny Horowitz, in the couple's upscale Florida home.
Our position was always that Donna Horowitz was losing everything, and ultimately she decided that she had had enough.
Her frustration and her hatred became so much that she decided that she was going to kill, the love of her life.
When it's their turn, Donna's defense argues that she wasn't the one who wanted Lanny dead.
The defense argued that it was Radley or that Radley had hired someone to do this.
The defense relied on the smudge of a thumbprint maybe or fingerprint on a gate leading out of the house.
Could have been anybody. It could have been one of us. It could have been a firefighter. It could have been a gardener. It could have been some maintenance person. It could have been anybody.
The defense was trying to argue that meant that there was an unknown killer and that this could have been a hitman hired by Radley because he had purchased this paperback collectible edition of some kind of hire hitman or something like that.
Whether he'd pulled the trigger himself or hired someone to do it, the defense argued that Radley had resented his father for years, especially after serving time on federal firearms charges.
The defense was that he was still angry 5 years later about this weapons piece, that he blamed his father for that. He's pissed at his dad for giving him that advice.
Defense dug into every issue that he and his father had ever had, every conflict that he and his father would have had. They questioned him and pushed him on it. It was clear that Lanny was not a supportive father, and every misstep that Radley took, he was critical.
The defense was basically trying to make out that Radley was the angry, disgruntled child, but he also had ulterior motives, potentially for money, for the inheritance from his father.
Radley was getting everything. He was the sole heir to Lanny Horowitz.
He was due to get $500,000 in a life insurance policy.
Donna's defense seems to be going down this road of Radley's the worst person in the world. He must have done it.
I don't believe for a second that Radley ever dreamed they would be that aggressive and vigorous and basically unrelenting, saying that he was the one that did it. Who does that to their own child?
It got hard after you're listening day after day. You did this, when you didn't. And it was a lot for him.
All this stuff that her defense lawyer tried to say, a hitman and all this kind of crap. And he was just trying to do his job. And his job is to get his client off any way that he can.
On January 17th, the jurors retired to consider their verdict. And less than 2 hours later, they announced their decision.
Ultimately, the verdict was returned for second-degree murder with a firearm.
The jury did a great job seeing through the smoke and mirrors and everything that was being portrayed and put out there by the defense.
The judge sentences Donna to 32 years in prison.
Given Donna's age, it's a life sentence, practically speaking.
We were very comfortable with the outcome of it and the sentence as well.
Donna's single-minded pursuit of retribution had not only destroyed her own future, it also devastated the lives of the people she loved most.
What she did completely blew her family apart. You certainly can't justify something like that.
In this case, unlike a lot of our cases, there's no good guy or bad guy. There was no winner in this.
Lanny lost his life. Donna will never get out of prison. Radley lost both of his parents. Everybody lost, absolutely. And she didn't have to do that. She could have walked away. She chose not to.
She was kind of trying to still live up to that lifestyle of the affluent Jupiter community, and I think in somewhat denial.
There's been a lot of people in this country that want to present this sort of tremendous success through materialistic things, whether it's a house, whether it's cars, whether it's going on boats. And this is a tragic story where once that veneer was pulled back and there was debt and triple mortgages, then massive stress starts to come in. And people aren't honest with each other. And people don't deal with the issues. They just misdirect them. They bury them. And sometimes they explode.
two families at war in rural Tennessee.
One crazy group living across the street from another crazy group.
At the most basic level, they antagonized the daylights out of one another.
Yeah, come on, you piece of come on back over here again.
After years of conflict, their heated rivalry finally explodes into violence.
This was coming to a head. Something very bad was going to happen.
And investigators must determine whether it was an act of self-defense or a deadly ambush.
There was more to this case than just neighborhood feud goes bad.
September 16th, 2013. It's a pleasant evening in the rural community of Union County, Tennessee. But around 10 p.m., the sheriff's office receives an emergency call about possible gunshots near Highway 370.
Highway 370, for the most part, it's a two-lane highway. There are neighbors around, but it's not a subdivision.
When police arrive, they see a man lying in a ditch on the side of the road, and it appears he's been shot several times. They tried to administer aid to the victim, but it was way too late. He had lost so much blood.
Deputies immediately recognized the victim as local resident Michael Woodby, a 45-year-old father and former repairman.
Michael Woodby and his wife, Teresa, were sort of part of the community. People knew them.
Michael Andrew Woodby was born on November 6th, 1967.
Michael was born in Middlesboro, Kentucky, raised in Tennessee, Campbell County, and Scott County.
When he became an adult, he moved to Detroit, Michigan. And there he got a job working on commercial kitchen equipment.
He went to all the restaurants and fixed all their equipment.
While living in Michigan, Michael started a family and had 2 kids. But the relationship didn't last. And in 1996, Michael met 31-year-old Teresa Molka. She also had 2 children from a previous relationship, and Michael's fun-loving personality quickly won her over.
He was a jokester. He loved giving. He'd gather up gifts all year round and hand it out to all the poor kids in the neighborhood at Christmas time.
Over the next 17 years, Michael and Teresa built a life together and raised their 4 children. But as empty nesters in their 40s, the couple began to face some unexpected challenges.
Because he was a large man and because of his physical condition, Michael ran into serious medical problems.
He had had some heart issues twice. Had a heart event back in 2008 and then another one in 2009. And he just couldn't get around like he used to.
While they're dealing with all of that, one of the daughters becomes pregnant and has a child, but she can't care for that child. So Michael and Teresa decided that they would.
In 2010, Michael and Teresa decided to make things simpler and moved back to where he grew up in rural Tennessee.
What I wanted was for our grandson to have stability and a forever home. It was getting really rough where we were living, and we just decided to come back.
They found a nice little house along the highway about 25 miles north of Knoxville.
The property we purchased had 6 acres almost. It has lake access all the way around it. It's close to the freeways, close to the hospitals.
Teresa took a job as a nurse, while Michael stayed at home to care for their grandson.
It's just a wonderful area to raise children in. We were happy with what we found. I mean, it was beautiful. The land was beautiful.
But now, Michael Woodby has been found shot to death on the side of the road, not far from their home.
Sheriff's deputies secured the scene, but keep in mind, this is a small department. They have limited resources, and they know they're going to need help dealing with such a serious case. So they call in the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to help.
Special Agent Andy Corbett is immediately assigned to the case.
I met with the local sheriff's department there on the scene, and they shared what known information they had.
Michael's body is found lying on its left side, and a preliminary search turns up 4 9mm shell casings.
All 4 shell casings were in a pretty close proximity to one another, and also close to where the body was at.
They also find a wooden stick and a flashlight near his body, and they think he may have been holding those items when he was shot.
Since the Woodbys live nearby, investigators walk over to break the bad news to Michael's wife.
After I was told deceased, I lost my mind. It was a blur after that. It was a blur.
She's obviously distraught, but she's able to tell them as much as she possibly can. And what she does reveal is that she thought that her husband had gone out for a walk about 1/2 hour earlier.
He was walking to get exercise, and this was his way to hopefully improve his health condition.
It was very hot in the summer, so he preferred to go on his walks at night when it was cooler, and he usually took a walking stick.
Teresa said that a few minutes after Michael left, she heard gunshots. But at the time, she hadn't been worried.
He's a big man. He's not scared of anything, so I wasn't scared for him. My worry and fear didn't come on until I saw them police lights. And I thought, oh no.
Teresa told police that she thought somebody had ambushed Michael, and she said she had a pretty good idea of who it might be.
Coming up, investigators learn of a neighborhood feud like no other.
You see people not liking their neighbor. This takes it to a level that's unbelievable.
Detectives in Union County, Tennessee, are investigating the shooting death of 45-year-old Michael Woodby. But his wife, Teresa, believes she already knows who did it.
She tells police she's fairly certain it's a member of the Wagner family. Now, the Wagner family are neighbors, and the two families have had a long-running feud for a few years.
They were, half an acre over. You could see the house, but you're not like right in a suburb area where you're right next to each other.
Teresa tells police that when she and Michael first arrived, everything seemed fine.
We had gotten along with the Wagners when we had moved in. They were the first ones to come over and welcome us into the neighborhood.
The problems began when the Woodbys discovered their new neighbors were operating a gun range on their property.
The Wagners would allow people to test fire weapons and also recreationally fired weapons at that gun range.
Keep in mind, this was a rural area of Union County, and there was nothing per se illegal about firing weapons on your own property.
We're not talking about gunfire now and then. We're talking about constant gunfire. The Woodbys had moved to this very neighborhood so that they could raise their grandson. They went to the Wagners, asked for them to tone it down, and they claimed that the Wagners would not listen.
That's what they did every time I stepped out the door. I heard the gunshots myself.
But it wasn't until March of 2011, about 8 months after they moved in, when their feud really started.
Mr. Woodby had suffered from a heart condition and had come home from the doctor and was trying to rest.
The near constant gunfire was bad enough, but according to the Woodbys, the Wagoners started actually using explosives on top of it.
The Wagners were constantly shooting and blowing up explosives that caused him problems, that it was keeping him up.
Teresa tells investigators it got so bad that Michael finally had to confront Kevin Wagoner.
Michael had went over there and asked them to stop. And their response was, "Get the out of here."
Mr. Wagner said basically he'll do what he wants on his own property.
He came home. He was very upset. He couldn't understand how people could be that way.
After that, the noise only increased, and so did Michael's frustration.
He continued to grow upset because every time they were asked to stop, they would step up that game and do something worse.
Kevin had stationary surveillance cameras pointed at the Woodby's house, recording constantly. And he also had handheld video recorders every time the Woodby stepped outside. They were under surveillance.
Everything from doing yard work to out playing in the front yard with their grandchild.
We were not sure why he was videotaping our grandson. We had asked for it to stop numerous times. And the more we had asked for it to stop, the stronger it continued. I had never dealt with anything like that before, so I just thought they were crazy.
Teresa says Kevin wasn't the only one videotaping them. He involved his wife and children, too.
Either Kevin Wagner himself or his daughter or his son or his wife was filming them constantly.
Colton, the son, went armed. Kevin Wagner went armed. They patrolled the streets.
It was a constant tense situation.
Soon the would-be's simple noise complaint had escalated out of control.
This feud between the Woodbys and the Wagners was really unlike any other feud that I have seen. This small disagreement and then boom, we're at war.
According to Teresa, the Wagners would point guns at them, use binoculars to spy on them, and make serious threats.
Teresa says they called the sheriff's office many times, but nothing ever changed.
You know, feuds between neighbors have been going on since the beginning of time, really. And it runs law enforcement ragged.
Law enforcement simply we do not have the ability to make people get along.
This goes on for a full year. So finally, in March of 2012, the Woodbys tried to get an order of protection against the Wagners, but they were denied.
To prove that the Wagoners had been obsessively recording and harassing them without provocation, the Woodbys ultimately decided to fight fire with fire.
Michael decides that he's going to start videotaping the actions of the Wagners so he can build a case. So he has some evidence, and hopefully that would be enough to make the Wagners stop.
I don't know how they do this 24/7.
I don't either.
I'm tired of holding this camera 10 minutes into it. I mean, come on.
You have more time when you get brains.
Obviously.
But no one realized how far the Wagoners were willing to go to win the war. Coming up, a neighborhood feud takes a dangerous turn.
He was videotaping our grandson and carrying a gun at the same time.
Less than an hour after Michael Woodby was found shot to death near his home in rural Tennessee, investigators have a person of interest. In fact, they have several.
There was a long-standing feud between these two families, and Michael's wife, Teresa, was convinced that it was someone in the Wagner family that did the shooting.
Teresa tells detectives that the bad blood between the families had been going on for more than a year, when in 2012, the Wagoners suddenly escalated the conflict.
Reportedly, they started calling law enforcement and making up allegations against the Woodbys, and also apparently tried to get his disability taken away from him.
Hi there, my name is Kevin Wagner. I have information about Michael Woodby. If he's disabled, then I'm Mickey Mouse. And I have proof, everything you need.
According to Teresa, Kevin Wagner even called child services and made false allegations about the way they were treating their grandson.
The final straw came when Teresa says they caught Kevin Wagner's 21-year-old son Colton in the bushes, videotaping their 4-year-old grandson.
That is what incensed them the most, is that an innocent child out in the yard playing would be videotaped.
It was dangerous. They would videotape my grandson getting on his preschool bus with a gun in their hand, to the point where the bus driver wouldn't even come to the house to pick my grandson up anymore. She was terrified for the other children.
On May 30th, 2013, just 4 months before the shooting, the Woodbys once again tried to get an order of protection. But just like their previous attempts, their request was denied.
I have never been videotaped by a neighbor every day of my life, 24/7, whether I came out at nighttime or in the morning. Neighbors don't do that to one another.
According to what Teresa has told police, it seems that the Wagners' campaign of harassment was taken to the next level, leading Kevin to eventually shoot Michael.
I had thought that they ambushed him in the dark on his way back from his walk.
But Teresa's account of the feud isn't proof of murder. So Special Agent Corbett heads up the hill to interview the Wagoners, where sheriff's deputies have already taken 42-year-old Kevin into custody.
According to police, Kevin comes out of his house and he's holding his Glock 9mm handgun. So they take the gun away from him and they hold him.
Kevin Wagner was placed in the back of a patrol car. He was not combative, and he was cooperative. He agreed to speak with me.
Kevin Lee Wagoner was born on August 5th, 1971, in Elkhart, Indiana.
He enjoyed baseball when he was a kid, so we a lot of times I remember playing catch.
He was always outgoing. He'd talk to anybody. He was a great guy, would give the shirt off his back if he had to.
After high school, Kevin planned to become a police officer. But his dream had been shattered during his final baseball game.
There was an accident, and the kid that they were both running in the outfield for a fly ball, and the kid hit him in his ear, and it broke his collarbone and his canal to his ear and everything, so he lost the hearing in his ear. So he could never be a police officer.
Kevin decided to switch gears, attending Indiana University in 1990. It was there he met his wife, Kennette.
The two fell in love and Kennette got pregnant. So he dropped out of school and they got married in 1992. When Colton was born, Kennette decides that she's going to stay home and raise the child. Kevin goes out and gets a job as a purchasing agent.
He'd done a lot of warehouse stuff, supervising, I guess, over shipments and in and out.
Soon after, their daughter Kelsey was born. The family stayed in Elkhart for the next 15 years. But by 2009, the Wagoners decided it was time for a change.
The kids were teenagers and they decided they wanted warmer weather, so they packed up and moved down here to Tennessee.
Kevin wanted to live off the land, raising the chickens and goats and things like that.
That June, the family moved into the house on the hill overlooking Highway 370.
He bought this property because it did have a lot of land and kind of a mountain area where he could use as a shooting range. We like to go shoot.
The Wagner residence consisted of a house, a shed, and then another third building.
Kevin decided he would refurbish that building and turn it into a gun shop. And by the end of the year, he opened for business.
But in August of 2011, Kevin got the opportunity to work as a security guard for the Knox County school system.
He always wanted to be a police officer. Being a security guard was the next best thing, and he loved it.
But Kevin's dreams have been put on hold, as he is now the main suspect in his neighbor's murder. Coming up, Kevin Wagoner tells detectives his side of the story.
Mr. Woodby told him he was going to spread his son's brains all over Highway 370.
The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has taken 42-year-old Kevin Wagoner in for questioning about the murder of his neighbor, Michael Woodby. But Kevin's version of events turns out to be very different from what they've heard so far.
Kevin did not shy away from stating that there was this ongoing feud, but there was a difference of opinion or of what caused the relationship to sour.
Kevin says the trouble began in the spring of 2011, about 8 months after the Woodbys moved in, and about 2.5 years before Michael was murdered.
Kevin Wagner's version of why this conflict started was that he said Mr. Woodby came over and wanted to buy a weapon from his gun shop.
Michael Woodby asked my brother that if he could purchase it without doing a background check.
Michael Woodby had run-ins with the law in his past, and as a result of that, he had a felony conviction. It was something fairly minor, but in Tennessee, if you are a convicted felon, you can't have a weapon.
Essentially, my brother told him no, that he couldn't do that he could lose his license.
But Kevin says Michael wouldn't take no for an answer, despite his drug conviction. Instead, Michael suggested they let his wife buy the gun for him.
It's called a straw purchase. And what that essentially means is that someone else's name is put on the paperwork. It's a legal loophole, and most people tend to get away with it unless that gun is used in the commission of crime.
Kevin refused to sell Michael a firearm in contravention of federal and state law. And that was the beginning of the end of their relationship.
Kevin says that's when the Woodbys suddenly changed their attitude about the gun range.
They had to shoot the guns in order to make sure they worked before they could sell them. So Woodbys didn't like it that they could shoot the guns and wouldn't sell them one.
Kevin told police that when all the noise complaints didn't work for the Woodby family, they took it to the next level and started making threats against the Wagners.
Oftentimes it was very petty. You're looking at me, you're looking at my wife, you're looking at my child, you're looking at me cross. There were lots of accusations.
Mr. Woodby and his wife would call the police quite often. The police would never find anything and never made a report of any incident that went on. So he would ask the police what he needed to do with his neighbor, and they advised him that he needed to record incidents that took place.
They needed something that had a date and time stamp for them to be able to do something to Mr. Woodby.
Just like the Woodbys had, Kevin Wagner tells police he bought the handheld cameras to gather evidence for a restraining order against the Woodbys.
The reason why every moment was being recorded by the Wagners is because over the course of time, the incidents started to increase in frequency.
People are freaks!
Kevin says that in August, Michael assaulted him in their yard. But Michael threatened to do even worse to his son, Colton.
He said he wanted to kill him, that you're not going to miss your son. I'll go to prison, that you won't have your son no more, kind of comments.
Mr. Woodby told him he was going to spread his son's brains all over Highway 370.
Kevin says that when the court refused to grant a restraining order, he decided to go public.
In early September of 2013, we had a package arrive in the newsroom, and it was a DVD. So we pop it in to watch it, and it's footage of this Union County neighborhood, and it captured a screaming match between Kevin Wagner and Michael Woodby. Also in that package was a letter and a stack of documents from Kevin Wagner where he lays out his case that Michael Woodby is dangerous, violent, is out to get them, and law enforcement wouldn't do anything. And it was essentially a plea to the media to get involved.
But the strategy seemed to backfire, leading to a direct confrontation on the night of the shooting.
Wagner stated that he was out for a night walking with his son.
They were going to go down the street and check on an empty house that they had told the lady that lived there that they would do periodically, make sure nobody was breaking into it.
Kevin and Colton claimed that when they got there, they found Michael Woodby outside acting strangely.
According to Kevin, Michael was drunk and attacked them without warning.
Kevin Wagner stated that Michael Woodby was coming at him with this stick, attempting to strike them.
He was screaming at Woodby to get back. He wasn't sure what was going on, but Woodby was coming after his son again.
In fear for his son's life, he shot Michael Woodby and killed him in self-defense.
Kevin said he was the one who made the call to 911, and that's how the sheriff's department found out about the shooting.
When investigators speak to Colton, he tells a similar story.
Colton Wagner stated that Michael Woodby struck him with a large stick, specifically on the shoulder and the head.
But will the evidence support their claims of self-defense? Coming up, investigators discover there's still more to the story.
You could look at it as it was all part of this sort of diabolical plan.
Kevin Wagner has just confessed to killing his neighbor, Michael Woodby, but he insists it was necessary to protect his son.
He said Michael Woodby was coming at them, swinging this stick. At that time, he opened fire.
But something doesn't sit right with investigators.
I found there to be some inconsistencies in their stories.
Colton said Michael hit him on the head, but according to police, Colton did not appear to have any injuries, and he refused to go to the hospital for treatment.
The biggest thing is that Mr. Wagner stated that the shooting occurred on his side of the road, what we would call the Wagner side of Highway 370.
However, Michael's body wasn't found on the Wagner side of the highway.
All of Mr. Woodby's belongings, including that stick, are in the ditch on Mr. Woodby's side of the road.
If police are to believe Kevin's story, Michael would have had to make his way across the road with the stick in his hand, with a flashlight in his hand, after being shot 4 times and collapse in a ditch.
And what belies that, first, is that there's no blood in the road. That was something they searched extensively for. And the shell casings that were found were over 25 feet away on the other side of the road on Mr. Woodby's side.
Detectives confront Kevin about the discrepancies in his story, but he refuses to budge. So less than 24 hours after the murder, they decide to charge him with criminal homicide, and his son is charged with facilitation.
He couldn't believe that we were actually charging him for this, that he felt that it was, that it was a self-defense type issue.
I was shocked, to say the least. I mean, that's not Kevin. Kevin has been around guns all of his life. There's never been a question of him harming anybody.
Armed with a search warrant, investigators descend on the Wagner home, seizing boxes of video recordings, weapons, and computers.
There's 100 to 200 hours of video recording that we recovered. Then there was about 180 hours of audio recording.
It soon becomes clear that Kevin Wagner wasn't just collecting evidence against his neighbors. He was obsessed with them.
I've never seen anything like it. You know, you deal with people with surveillance cameras around their home. Never seen anything like this.
At first glance, the contents of the videotapes appear to support Kevin's claims.
Some of the recordings from the Wagners would capture Michael Woodby at his worst. He would say things toward them, hateful things.
Come on. Yeah, come on, you piece of. Come on back over here, Jeff.
But it contained no lead up to the actions of Mr. Woodby. We thought that was odd. It contained only excerpts of the most egregious acts of Mr. Woodby. And it would lead one to think that Mr. Woodby was, oh my gosh, he's a horrible neighbor.
But after reviewing all of the footage, investigators believe Michael had been goaded into those outbursts.
You could tell that he wasn't just out there just yelling for no reason. It was always about something that the Wagners had done prior to those cameras coming out.
They would taunt him to the point where he would come out yelling. And the minute he would start yelling, they would turn that camera on to make it look like he was just coming after them for no reason at all.
Tell you right now. I'll kill you, Rick. I don't give a son of a you got a gun out here again. I do. Big deal. Yeah, it's illegal. Yes, it is. Go in. Yes, it is. Right there.
Mr. Wagner chose to walk back and forth in front of their residence. It was simply to antagonize the Woodbys.
They even find a recording where Michael tried to end the conflict.
Why can't we be good neighbors? Why can't we be good to one another? Why do we got to continue this? I'm asking. I'm begging. For your family and mine.
On at least 2 occasions that we know about, he asked them to end the conflict.
Please,
and they declined both times.
The most damning evidence is a recording that suggests Kevin had been planning to kill Michael. It was one of the few recordings he didn't send to the media.
I don't grasp how it is that you can be so oblivious to your true surroundings and how close you are to dying. This is 100% within his control now, not to die from me. And he's choosing to come straight at it.
The audio snippet of where he actually talked about killing Michael Woodby in that wasn't included in the packet. And there were all kinds of different things like that. What he didn't send was more telling than what he did send.
The results of Michael's autopsy confirms detectives' suspicions. The shooting was not an act of self-defense.
The evidence showed that there was 4 shots or 4 rounds that were fired to Michael Woodby.
On May 1st, 2014, almost 8 months after the shooting, Kevin Wagner is indicted by a grand jury for second-degree murder. His son Colton is also indicted as a co-conspirator.
What the prosecution did at that point was then to separate the 2 cases, and Kevin Wagner was set for trial first.
At that point, they thought they had a relatively strong case. But of course, we know there's never a promise of conviction.
If you have a prosecutor that tells you they know how a trial is going to end up, I don't think they're being candid with you. You never know what a jury is going to do.
Coming up, Kevin's trial takes an unexpected turn.
I think the prosecution was just as shocked as everybody else.
Kevin Wagner and his son Colton have both been charged in the murder of their neighbor, 45-year-old Michael Woodby. And on August 25th, 2015, 2 years after the fatal shooting, Kevin is the first to stand trial.
My thoughts and prayers were that they would be convicted. All the meanwhile praying, God forgive me for feeling that way about somebody.
Prosecutors describe Kevin as a man so obsessed with his war against Michael that he was willing to do anything to win it.
They argue that Kevin deliberately pushed Michael Woodby to the edge, to the breaking point, so that he could capture his apparently maniacal behavior on camera, and that Kevin used his own son as bait. Sending those DVDs to the media set up his claim of self-defense.
We believe that was a planning packet for him to lay the groundwork when the opportunity presented itself that he could murder his neighbor.
And 3 days after Kevin sent those DVDs to the media, an opportunity presented itself.
Mr. Woodby was walking on Highway 370, as he often did, with a walking stick in one hand and a flashlight in the other.
When Michael Woodby saw Kevin and Colton, both sides do what they do, and that is they start yelling at each other.
Based on the forensic evidence, prosecutors believe Michael was turning to walk away when Kevin pulled the trigger 4 times.
It appeared that the last 2 shots fired at him happened after he fell to the ground.
We think that this was an opportunistic killing.
But the defense sees things differently.
The series of events that led to Michael Woodby being shot that evening, what brought the 3 of them together in the dead of night in the middle of that road. There is no doubt in my mind that Michael Woodby struck Colton Wagner with that stick.
Kevin took the stand to testify in his own defense, and he described for the jury the harassment and threats that led up to that fateful night, and especially the attack on his son. Kevin tells the jury he felt he had no choice.
After deliberating for 2 days, the jury reports that they are hopelessly deadlocked.
Unfortunately, it declared a mistrial. They were not able to come to a conclusion.
Obviously, we were happy that it turned out hung jury. We kind of wanted a acquittal, but it didn't happen.
As the state prepares for the second trial, they make a surprising decision. They drop the charges against Colton, citing lack of evidence, and subpoena him as a witness instead.
Essentially, they were going to not only retry Kevin Wagner, but they were going to use his son against him.
On August 2nd, 2016, the second trial begins.
We were better prepared, I believe, and had a lot better grasp of all of the recordings during the second trial. When you're talking about over 300 hours of recordings, that's an enormous undertaking.
Colton took the stand, trying desperately to defend his father. But the prosecution was able to take his testimony and poke holes in a lot of it.
The prosecution was able to show through Colton and the videos how Colton himself was being used by his father as part of this vendetta or obsession with the Woodbys.
This time, the prosecution is also armed with new video evidence, proving this wasn't the first time Kevin had clashed with a neighbor.
He testified on the under cross-examination that he had had incidents in Indiana, and he had recorded people in Indiana. And that was something that very much hurt his credibility.
When Kevin started testifying, it unraveled very, very quickly. His lack of regret, his inability to effectively detail to the jury any mistakes that he made, to me, were his ultimate undoing.
On August 10th, 2016, the jury finds Kevin Wagner guilty of second-degree murder. He is sentenced to 18 years in prison.
There was sort of this shock feel in the courtroom. You could hear Kenneth, his wife, Kevin Wagner's wife, kind of yell out. Teresa Woodby started crying. It was very emotional.
I cried for not only myself, but for their family also. That's a terrible thing to happen. What happened? It was awful.
Although the verdict brings some relief to one of the families, the devastating effects of their deadly feud will linger for generations to come.
He was my home. Everything. My joy, my laughter, my partner, my friend, my confidant, my uplifter.
Part of the big tragedy of this case is that really it didn't have to happen. If these two families had just been willing to sit down and compromise, none of this would ever happen. No one would be dead. No one would be behind bars.
The best way for this feud to have been resolved would be under the premise of love thy neighbor. We all have, shortcomings in life, and sometimes we just have to look over the shortcomings of others, put that behind us, and move on and get along with one another.
He was a hard-working father surrounded by the people he loved most.
His world revolved around his kids.
Until a bitter rivalry turned his quiet suburban neighborhood into a battleground.
This feud was escalating and escalating. Police had been called to the neighborhood multiple times as a result of this dispute.
These people fucked with me and fucked with me.
But was it an act of self-defense? Or a preemptive strike?
Officers at crime scenes are accustomed to seeing carnage, but in this case, it truly looked like a war zone.
September 3rd, 2012. It's Labor Day weekend in the small town of Titusville, Florida.
Titusville, here in Brevard County, it's sort of a throwback city. It feels like you're driving into the 60s.
It's equal parts rural, but very much part of the Kennedy Space Center. So there are a lot of engineers, a lot of very well-educated.
But the typically quiet holiday is about to come to a terrifying end. Just after midnight, Titusville police get a report of shots fired in a suburban neighborhood.
911, what's the emergency? Everyone's being shot outside. I need someone here now. My husband's outside bleeding to death. My husband went outside and I'm inside and there's shots going off everywhere. I need someone here. Okay, my doors are locked. Help on the way.
The caller's name is Carrie Blake, and she's calling about her husband, Bruce.
Officers who arrive at crime scenes are accustomed to seeing carnage, but in this case, it truly looked like a war zone. All of this chaos was occurring on a driveway between two homes.
He's alone, which has to be a very intense situation for an officer arriving under those circumstances. He doesn't know at this point who the good guys, who the bad guys are.
The two houses belong to the Blakes and their neighbors, Gary Hembry and Roger Pichor. All three men have been shot.
Mr. Hembry and Mr. Pichor were both lying in their own front yard. Mr. Blake, I believe, was lying in his driveway.
While the officer secures the area, paramedics tend to the wounded. Bruce Blake and Roger Pichor are immediately rushed to the hospital. The third victim isn't as lucky.
Gary Hembry died at the scene. He was shot multiple times, and one of those shots was an execution-style bullet right to the head.
Gary Hembry was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1973.
He was exactly what I wanted. I wanted a brown-eyed boy, and that's what I got. He was happy all the time. He loved to eat. He was funny. He had the funniest personality. God, he was just a sweetheart. He just really was a sweetheart.
At the age of 3, his grandmother died, and so the entire family said, you know what, let's move, let's get a fresh start. And so they picked Titusville, Florida.
After high school, Gary got a job as a plumber's assistant and looked forward to starting a family of his own. He got married and had 2 boys. But by 2002, he found himself divorced with primary custody of the kids.
I would say he was one of the best fathers that I could have asked for. He did everything he could for us. You know, money might not have been there, but it didn't matter. We still managed to live our best life.
In 2003, Gary became a father again to a little girl named Destiny. Though he and the mother didn't stay together, they shared custody of their daughter.
Gary was someone who loved a lot of company. He loved all the children playing in the yard. He loved having friends over. It almost seemed like there was never a quiet moment at his house.
The Hembry household became even more crowded in 2012 when Gary's new girlfriend Kim moved in with her children.
I believe it was like March when she moved into the house, and she had twin girls and she had a son, but the son lived with his father, but came there on the weekends.
I had one sister, one brother, me and my dad, his girlfriend and his kids, and we would just always have our friends constantly over. But It's what we like, so we lived with it. It was normal.
But as far as Gary was concerned, there was always room for one more.
Gary and Roger, I guess they had been friends probably 16 years. He was supposed to move into these apartments and it wasn't quite ready yet, so he had already gave notice where he lived. So Gary told him to put his stuff in storage and stay there.
Roger had kids. He was a funny guy. He liked to mess around a lot. He was kind of like redneckish.
And when Gary landed a job in construction at the Kennedy Space Center, it seemed like that year was destined to be the best of his life.
As Gary approached his 39th birthday, it seemed like he had everything. All his kids around him, a new girlfriend, and a new job, one that seemed like the job of a lifetime.
He got a job out at the Kennedy Space Center. He was so excited. He just had all these plans.
But a month later, Gary Hembry would be gunned down in his driveway, leaving Florida police wondering what happened. Coming up, a backyard barbecue turns into a bloodbath.
He had evidence of bullets all over in front of the two houses, shell casings everywhere.
Roger Pichor and Bruce Blake have been airlifted to hospitals after an unidentified shooter opened fire in their neighborhood. The third victim, 39-year-old Gary Hembry, is dead.
He had evidence of bullets, all over the area, all over in front of the two houses, shell casings everywhere. There were cars in both driveways. You had evidence of projectile damage to both vehicles. You had multiple wounds to each victim.
Investigators were able to determine quite a bit from just the shell casings alone. As it turned out, he fired a 9mm Beretta, and he had reloaded several times.
The Beretta had a 15-round capacity clip. He already had a round into the chamber and 15 rounds in the clip, 16 rounds there. He then reloaded with a second clip of 15 rounds. So you had a total of 31 rounds expended.
Someone had turned this neighborhood cookout into a shooting gallery. But who was he? And why?
Over the course then of the night, detectives arrived, crime scene people arrived, and the full-blown investigation was undertaken.
When police first arrive on the scene, the thing they discover is that the two families had been having a barbecue.
There was definitely my dad, his girlfriend, Roger's girlfriend, Roger's son, Roger's stepson, and a couple of their friends. I was at my mom's house, and my sister was with her mom, and my brother was staying the night at his friend's house.
They started the cookout like 4:30 or so.
Also in attendance were Bruce and Carrie Blake.
The Blakes were relatively new to the neighborhood. They had just moved in earlier that year.
The two victims' homes are on the same frontage street here, Smith. Hembry and Pichor lived here, and then the next house over to that was Bruce Blake's house.
The families tell police that as the evening went on, the party had grown louder.
This was quite the party. It lasted 8 hours long, so you can imagine some of the neighbors might have been a little bit annoyed. Then came midnight, all hell broke loose.
Roger Pichor was the first victim.
Mr. Pichor and his son, Justin, 15-year-old, had been sitting on the tailgate of a pickup truck in front of their residence, talking about fishing, had then gotten up and started walking toward the residence. That was the first shot, right in front of Justin, and he saw his father go down.
I wouldn't even want to know how it was to be there and having to see your dad get shot.
Bruce Blake would be the next victim. Totally caught off guard. He probably didn't even realize what hit him.
Mr. Blake, as I understand it, was shot in his own driveway. After he was shot, he was still managed to crawl a little ways.
Hearing the shots, Gary Hembry had stepped out of his house and into a hail of gunfire.
Mr. Hembry, not knowing what was going on, walked out into his front yard to basically say, "What is going on out here? What's all this noise?" He was shot.
Gary Hembry's body was riddled with 17 bullet wounds. He was the only one shot that many times, so it really seemed like he was the primary target.
The multiple wounds in this particular case would clearly suggest to me, based on my experience, rage, anger. I think what you had here was a combination of calculated malice mixed with rage.
But who could have hated Gary enough to open fire on him and his neighbors? Roger's son Justin tells investigators he knows exactly who the shooter was.
Justin was able to identify the shooter to police. His name was Billy Woodward. He lived right across the street. And Justin was absolutely certain because he told cops he had come face to face with him during the incident.
Mr. Woodward looked at him and Justin said, "Don't shoot me, don't shoot me."
He also has a good idea why Billy did it.
According to families of the victims, the attack was the result of a long brewing feud in the neighborhood.
Police had been called to the neighborhood multiple times as a result of this dispute. This particular case escalated and became deadly.
Coming up, detectives learn how a simple argument turned a pair of neighbors into sworn enemies.
The harassment and the abusive conduct went literally off the charts.
Detectives in Titusville, Florida are investigating a neighborhood shooting spree that left Gary Hembry dead and his two friends in critical condition. Witnesses have identified 44-year-old Billy Woodward as the man with the gun.
What police do know at this point in the investigation is that the families had been squabbling numerous times over the past few months.
Professionally, I've dealt with disputes between neighbors before, but nothing that ever escalated anywhere near to this, nowhere near this.
What investigators want to know is, what made Billy Woodward take the feud to such an extreme?
Billy grew up here in Titusville. He was born in New York, but he's always lived here.
Billy was the oldest of two boys, and he had what you'd call a fairly stable middle-class upbringing.
After high school, Billy enlisted in the Army. While stationed in Japan, he almost died as the result of an accident.
He was tasked with building a gazebo for a superior officer for some event, and he's working on top of this gazebo, which breaks, and he does a header about 12 feet up into concrete.
He had a fractured skull. His spinal fluid was leaking. He ended up with meningitis as the spinal fluid was leaking out of his head. It damaged the nerves in one ear, so he is completely deaf in one ear.
After he recovered, he was reassigned to Saudi Arabia during Operation Desert Shield.
Billy did not see combat, but his base was subjected to several Scud missile attacks. In 1990, he finished his 4-year tour and decided not to re-enlist, but he was honorably discharged.
Billy was 23 when he returned home to Titusville and met the woman who would become his wife.
It was the best surprise. He and I just hit it off really well. We had moved in together before the end of the year. We got married on September the 4th in 1999.
To begin their new life together, Billy and Barbara bought a home on Smith Drive.
That house was really affordable, and we liked the neighborhood. We liked the school district that was in.
Over the next 8 years, they had 2 children, 1 girl, 1 boy, and it seemed like the perfect little family.
He was trained as a machinist, so he really didn't have trouble finding a job. He ended up working at the Space Center.
In 2001, things started to look rather dark for this seemingly perfect little family. Billy started suffering severe anxiety and depression, all because of his time in Iraq.
He did start going to the VA. He got registered, started seeing a doctor there. He had some testing done. They diagnosed him with PTSD and bipolar disorder.
But things seemed to get a little better when their new next-door neighbors moved in.
We met Gary Hembry when he first moved into his house. He was painting, fixing it up, fixing up the yard. We thought, great, these are going to be great neighbors.
We would play video games with his kids, play in the backyard, on the swing set, just did a lot of stuff together.
As the children played together and got closer, so too did Gary and Billy. And Gary was fully aware of Billy's PTSD. He even tried to help him through that.
We tried several different things to try and on our end, to try and combat the PTSD. We tried having a dog several different times, but we just couldn't find the dog that was right for our family. So he and my daughter went to the feed store one day. I don't remember why they went to the feed store, but they came home with 4 chickens.
He definitely went all out for them. He built them their own whole 2-story house thing, and he spent a lot of time with them.
But after 10 years in the same neighborhood, everything changed in August of that year. Family members say the feud started over a birthday present.
A family friend had driven by, stopped, and left a gift on the front porch. Well, mysteriously, that gift just disappeared.
We spoke on the phone the next day, and she said, did the girls like the cake pops? And I said, well, I'm sorry, we didn't receive that.
The Woodwards would come to find out through other children in the neighborhood that it was Gary's daughter, Destiny, who stole that gift on the front porch.
Destiny took that present to a friend's house down the road and shared it with some other kids. Other kids saw it.
Mr. Woodward apparently confronted Mr. Hembry, accused their daughter of stealing these packages.
Gary is so incensed by this whole situation that he decides to retaliate. He calls authorities and reports that Billy Woodward is keeping a chicken coop in his backyard.
Apparently, Mr. Woodward was not maintaining these chickens within the ordinance. So the next thing happened, chickens had to be removed anyway. One thing leads to another.
He loved them. They were therapeutic. It was something that helped him calm himself, get through tough time periods. You know, he's a proud guy.
The Blakes and the Peachors both took Gary's side in the dispute, and the bad blood continued to grow.
They would stand out in their yard, which is, you know, close to our yard, of course, and just yell at us, obscenities and making fun, just irritating harassment.
But given Billy's psychological issues, the Hembrys were playing with fire.
You've got a war veteran with brain damage and PTSD. It's not surprising he might take things to the next level.
They had photographs on their phone cameras, of him sitting in his chair, his lawn chair out in his front yard, dressed like this, giving them the finger.
He told them, I'm going to wait till you all go to sleep, and I'm going to come in and kill all of you, including the kids and dogs.
And Billy eventually installed a camera.
He had out in front of his house mounted a camera which recorded both audio and video. And he had directed it so that you could see just to the back edge of the Hembry house.
The hostilities did not end. In fact, it got worse. So bad that both sides decided to go to court and ask for protective orders. The judge used his discretion and said, nope, go home, figure it out. He denied the injunction.
The judge said, you all just need to play nice.
But that wouldn't happen. Just 5 days after that hearing, Billy made good on his threats. Coming up, with one man dead and 2 others clinging to life, investigators get the other side of the story.
This was a man who had just been pushed too far to the brink.
It becomes a point where you're almost a prisoner in your own home.
In the early morning hours of September 3rd, 2012, detectives arrest Billy Woodward for the shooting of Gary Hembry, Roger Pichor, and Bruce Blake. He is surprisingly calm.
After it was over, William Woodward went back to his front lawn and sat down and waited for the cops to arrive.
He didn't put up a fight or threaten the officer in any way. He told him that it's done, they can't hurt us anymore, and he went peacefully with the police officer.
Billy confesses to the shooting, but according to him, it had been an act of self-defense.
We've been tormented for the last month by these people. I'm a combat veteran with brain damage, and I just snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. They declared war on me, and I'm a soldier. And soldiers fight to win. So I ended it tonight.
His entire premise was that he was a combat veteran who had suffered traumatic brain injury and suffered from PTSD, and he was back on the battlefield.
I think that this was a man who snapped, who had just been pushed too far to the brink.
Billy said it all began when Gary betrayed his friendship.
Things are now at an impasse. Billy's decided that his daughter can no longer go over and play at Gary's house. And what was worse in Billy's mind was the way that Gary handled the accusations that his daughter stole the gift.
When we went to confront Gary that morning on August 5th, it was a Sunday, I believe, he just got all bent out of shape and exploded on me.
Now it seems like a game of tit for tat. Gary calling the authorities to complain about Billy's chicken coop, which sets the whole chain of events in motion.
We've had the chickens for 2 years now, and all of our neighbors have loved it. We share eggs when they come to visit, and when everybody brings their kids over for like a little pet in the zoo.
Nice.
So when I saw him out there taking pictures of my property, I just went over the deep end. That happens when I get pushed.
That seemed to be the start. It really broke everything apart, and it just escalated. And, no one was adult enough to stop it.
Billy says the 3 families had banded against him, waging an ongoing war of harassment, and it had all been captured on the surveillance camera he installed.
And this is all recorded on my surveillance at home.
Carrie Blake actually told Mrs. Woodward that she was going to hire people to sodomize the Woodward's 12-year-old daughter. I mean, that's the level of vitriol that was coming from the victims.
I don't know any normal, decent person that could look at the behavior of this group and not be appalled by it.
They continued to harass him and his family daily, and so it becomes a point where you're almost a prisoner in your own home.
We were actually trying to find another house by this point to move out of the neighborhood. We just wanted out.
My wife has just been a nervous wreck ever since she started this. I mean, she cries all the time. That's what drove me over the edge, was seeing the stress on my family.
Billy says that on the day of the shooting, he and his wife took their children to the local pool. When they returned, the Hembry barbecue was in full swing, and Billy's surveillance camera was capturing it all.
With the amount of alcohol involved, it was really loud. It was crazy. There was people everywhere. It was loud. They were lighting stuff on fire.
Over the course of the hours from 9 to midnight, they periodically go to the street, start hollering at Mr. Woodward.
They were very clearly directing taunts, slanders, abuse at Mr. Woodward's home.
Billy was nervous, just as I was. It just seemed like things were a lot busier and louder, and it just seemed crazier than usual.
All of this would have been unsettling for just about anyone. But for a guy like Billy with PTSD, well, you can imagine why it set him off. And if it was war that Gary wanted, it was war he was going to get.
Around 11 p.m., after Barbara went to bed, Billy put on his military gear and loaded his Beretta.
I went out my back gate. I immediately went into what the military calls a crouching stance.
Okay.
And I used my truck for cover so they couldn't see my movement.
Then, for the next 20 minutes, he slowly maneuvered into position.
I remember crawling inches at a time and listening to him taunting and yelling across the street. Your mom's a fucking bitch. You dickhead. We're gonna fuck you up. It's all on surveillance. You can actually hear and see for yourself what they did tonight.
I think that he had 3 targets in mind. He saw Bruce, Roger, and Gary as his biggest threats.
Coming up, the final assault.
This is war to me. This is not murder. This is killing the enemy.
44-year-old Billy Woodward is in the middle of a confession about the shooting of his 3 neighbors, Gary Hembry, Roger Pichor, and Bruce Blake.
Based on the statements he made to the police the night of the crime, he was a combat veteran who had suffered a traumatic brain injury, suffered from PTSD.
The neighbors knew that he had PTSD issues. They knew he had mental health issues. And they harassed him anyway.
It just drove me into a rage. I was already over the edge, and I just couldn't control myself.
So what did you do next?
I kept on crawling.
Okay.
I was on a military mission. I was going to end this war.
How long did you sit there and listen to them when they were shouting?
For minutes. I waited for the lights to go out. When you hunt down an enemy, patience is a virtue.
Then finally, he made his move.
When I got to the corner of the house is when I charged. I know as a soldier that when you engage your enemy, you have to have the element of surprise.
You can see on the surveillance tape a figure emerges from the darkness. It's Billy with a Beretta.
I shot Roger in the torso. He slumped to the ground. I heard Bruce Blake say something. I followed him to his garage. He tried to go inside the door. I put rounds into his torso until he slumped to the ground. Gary Hembry come out of his garage and said, "What the hell's going on out here?" And I put one dead center of his chest. He slumped to the ground. I walked past Roger, who was writhing in pain, and I shot Gary Hembry twice in the head.
This may have seemed like the actions of a madman, but really, in Billy's mind, he was just following the rules of engagement, which is why he didn't shoot Justin Pichor.
He very much was looking at this as a battlefield. Women and children are non-combatants.
In Billy's mind, this was not murder. In Billy's mind, these men were dangerous, and he was going to do anything necessary to keep himself and his family safe.
It was Pichor, it was Blake, it was Hembry. Those 3 were the threat. He went to address the threat.
However, the more Billy tries to defend his actions, the more police question his mental health.
I don't deserve to go to jail for this. Those sorry motherfuckers deserve to go to jail for what they did to me and my family for the last month. And these people fucked with me and fucked with me and fucked with me and fucked with me and fucked with me.
It would be difficult for me to say that he was in the right state of mind at any point in this whole situation because of the emotional stress, the PTSD, his brain injury.
While investigators are working out how to proceed, they receive more bad news. Roger Pichor is dead.
After Billy shot him in the chest, he went back and fired one more time through his head. And that was the bullet that ultimately killed him.
Despite his severe injuries and damage to multiple organs, Bruce Blake is the lone survivor.
Bruce Blake was the only one of the three to live through the night. He was in rehabilitation for a few weeks, and then he was released.
Now, instead of one murder, Billy is indicted for 2.
2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted first-degree murder.
Prosecutors have surveillance tape. They even have a confession. But the question is, will Billy be able to stand trial, given his mental state at the time of the shooting?
We had him examined, and he was mentally fit to stand trial. Florida has a pretty low threshold. If you can understand what's going on and you can talk clearly to your lawyer and hear and understand what you're hearing and seeing in the courtroom, then you're good to go.
However, Billy pleads not guilty to all charges.
I extended plea offers to him. His attorney came back with me and said, he doesn't want your plea offer. And I said, well, is there anything he's willing to plead to? And his attorney said, the only thing he's willing to do is have you drop the charges and give him the gun back. And I said, that's, of course, ridiculous.
We talked to all the neighbors involved. They were more than happy to come talk to us because they had stories to tell about what had happened to Billy at the hands of these folks.
What all have you personally seen? I have witnessed harassment on Billy and all of his family. I've heard threats of things they're going to do to his family, and us ourselves have been threatened by those 2 houses.
The question was, would it be enough to exonerate him? Coming up, Billy Woodward takes the stand in his own defense.
You could tell he was getting angry as he was sort of reliving what had happened.
Billy Woodward has been charged with murdering his 2 neighbors, Gary Hembry and Roger Pichor. But even though he's confessed to the shooting, there's a chance the case might not go to trial.
Florida has something called the Stand Your Ground law. And essentially that means if your life is in danger or you feel your life is in danger, you have the right to kill someone in self-defense.
The pretrial motion in a Stand Your Ground is a request to have someone granted immunity from prosecution.
At the hearing, the court heard Billy's claims of the intense harassment his family suffered and the resulting fear it caused.
They torment us day and night. They stalk us, they harass us. They've threatened us in ways you would not even imagine.
As evidence, the defense shows surveillance footage taken in the weeks before the shootings.
Goddamn plastic G.I. Joe! Fuck you and your mother!
We showed a Facebook picture, or I think it was Roger Pichor, with an assault weapon, pointed at the camera. Billy clearly felt that these people were not only armed, but heavily armed.
Billy claims his neighbors were also planning to use more exotic weapons to attack his family.
Because I didn't know if that was a Molotov cocktail that would come through and into my house.
You can certainly see on the video that something of significance was burned while they were chanting such things as KKK and White Power and Burn Baby Burn.
However, the state argues that none of Billy's claims are true.
On cross-examination, I got him to admit that before he even went out of his house to start on cross, he realized that whatever that was not a Molotov cocktail.
Still, Billy insists that he'd been left with no choice but to act that night.
Had been declared upon my house and family for myself. Now I'm the only one in left because I left the children in limited play. Do you not understand that, sir?
After a week-long hearing, the judge announces his decision. He denies Billy's claim of immunity and declares that his actions are not in line with stand your ground or exercising self-defense.
No matter how reprehensible, disgusting, obnoxious, and vile the threats or the conduct, taunting by the victims, they didn't deserve to die. That was the essence of this case.
At trial, the state presents harrowing eyewitness testimony from the families of the victims, including Bruce Blake, the only one of Billy's targets to survive the ambush.
Gary come outside to see what was going on, and he run right straight up on Billy, and Billy just started shooting. He come back over to me, shot me 4 or 5 more times. Then he went back and shot Roger once.
This was a revenge killing. I cannot come up with any other reasonable explanation based on what I know.
This time, Billy does not testify in his own defense. Instead, his attorneys rely on his wife, Barbara, to convince the jury.
Gary said that she would rape my daughter. She said that she would have all the neighbors participate, and that she would burn down my house. I can still hear their voices screaming at me. I did try to speak directly to them. I wanted to impress upon them the kind person that Billy is. He didn't just decide, I'm going to go shoot these people. I believe that he did what was necessary to protect himself and our family.
However, the jury doesn't agree.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the charge. Defendant William Theodore Woodward is guilty of second-degree murder, discharge of a firearm causing death.
Over 6 years after the deadly shootout, he is found guilty of both second-degree murder charges and of attempted second-degree murder. For his crimes, Billy is given 2 life sentences. The decision would continue to create controversy.
I was absolutely stunned. I could not believe that this jury could find someone guilty of protecting their family.
Whether he was a cold-blooded killer or a tortured veteran who brought the war home with him, one thing was clear. 4 families had been torn apart forever.
I would trade places with her any day. If I could go see Gary in her cell, she should be lucky that she could still see him. No, I can't see him. I can't hug him.
In this case, you have no winners. I really felt badly for Woodward and his family, but you also have to feel for the people who died and who had families and children, and it could have just all been avoided, and which is the real tragic part of this whole thing.